2015, an elite DFS Army Commando unit formed to bring high-level DFS strategy to the masses. Today, hated by DFS sharks and lineup sellers alike, they continue their quest to turn dope into DFS pros.
Alright, welcome to Taco's Fast 40, presented to you by DFSArmy.com. So for this Father's Day Sunday, we're going to be headed to the Michigan International Speedway for the FireKeeper's Casino 400. Michigan is a 2-mile long round oval. It's the only 2-mile track on the NASCAR circuit besides Auto Club Speedway, which is also known as Fontana or California. They race there once per year, but we race here in Michigan twice. Once during the chase, and then once during the summertime, which would be this race right here, obviously. So when digging into the stats here, and looking at long-term driver averages at different tracks and seeing how they correlate to Michigan, it's no surprise that Auto Club Speedway is one of the two tracks that correlate the closest to Michigan, but we also see Pocono just slightly ahead of Auto Club there. Pocono's being the highest correlated track to Michigan here. Maybe it's because they both play around the same time of the year and are kind of similar. Pocono's a 2.5 compared to Michigan's 2 miles, but they were both repaved at around the same time. And Auto Club has a much older surface that hasn't been repaved any time recently. So the only other notably correlated track would be Las Vegas Speedway, and that's a 1.5 mile intermediate round oval, so that's kind of interesting to note there. This is a 200 lap race, so dominators are going to be slightly more important than last week, where we only had 140 laps. 200 laps, kind of just slightly under average, but it's also notable that there are only 37 cars in the field, so that kind of knocks a little bit of the scoring potential off of place differential for the guys that start in the very back there, but not by very much. This week we're probably going to focus more on finishing position and finishing points and being able to ground out those fast laps. I think fast laps are going to be important yet again as a stat that people may not think about because those don't all necessarily go to the leader. There will be a lot of pit strategy, and I kind of like some guys that have already got wins this season, guys like Ryan Newman or Austin Dillon or Ricky Stenhouse, because they'll be more inclined to gamble and either stay out and sneak onto the lead like we saw Eric Jones doing last year, or perhaps pitting really early or something and coming in on fresh tires and sneaking a lot of fast laps that way. I just think that they have more opportunity. They also come with more risk, of course, but in tournaments, that's what we're going to want to look for. We're going to look for some contrarian pivots off of some plays that I think are going to be very, very popular this week. And up top, it's pretty obvious who's got the best chances at dominating, and it might be about finding those kind of second-tier guys. Guys like McMurray or Kurt Busch, not exactly them, but you know, that second tier of driver, because I think they're a little bit more valuable this week. This is a sort of a low DNF track, and it's one where equipment matters a lot because it's an incredibly fast track. These slower teams just aren't really going to make it, but at the same time, you see a lot of people finishing on the lead lap. At this race last year, we saw 28 people finish on the lead lap, so it's not going to cut the field down to like 18 to 25 like we see at the 1.5 mile tracks. And a lot of that is just because the track is so big that you can pit stop and then come back and not lose a lap if you do it right. So I'm definitely okay with people gambling a bit this week. So those guys that already have wins and those guys that kind of are under the radar and will go very low owned, like in the low teens or something, of the guys in that like $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 range, the second tier of good drivers in NASCAR, because everybody knows who the good guys are. That's not going to be the question this week. And all of the studs pretty much qualified in the top, like 13 or so. There really aren't any large place differential plays until you get down into the value tier of drivers. But I think going off of the field in some certain situations this week will be very helpful. But let's just dive right into the field here. At the Fontana or Auto Club Speedway earlier in the year, we saw two dominators in that race. And those two were Truex Jr. and Kyle Larson. And those are the two guys on the front row this week. This is a really good front row. Not sure who's going to dominate out of these two guys. It might be both of them. And this week the pricing is a little bit weird because not very many guys are above $10,000. It's just Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Larson at $10,000 and $10,200. So the upper tier is kind of priced down a little bit this week. Makes it so you're able to fit like 4 of these guys. So I think stacking Truex and Larson together is going to be a very popular option this week. That way you don't have to worry about who's getting the dominator points, because it's pretty likely that they'll go back and forth giving each other the lead, as they've got some of the fastest cars. But they do have a few cars behind them that will make a difference. It's just 3 of the 4 cars directly behind them probably have no real dominator potential outside of Kyle Busch sitting in 4th. So Larson comes in on the pole, having the best season of his career, obviously. He's probably the best driver. As far as driver rating and stats are concerned this year, he was the top 2 machine for the first large chunk of the season. And he's the defending champion at this track. This has always been a very good track for him. And this was one of the 2 races last year where they tried out the new package, the lower downforce package that they use for every race this year. They tried it out last year at this track, so him winning that race is a very, very good thing for him. We're definitely going to want to look at that race last fall for sure. Granted, it was under chase conditions. It's still going to be interesting to see who was up on the top. And Kyle Larson looked quite dominant. This was his first win in his NASCAR career. And since this win of his last year kind of sparked a streak that hasn't really even stopped to this day. He's probably been the best driver in NASCAR since that point. And it's crazy the turnaround he made, but he truly is dominant. He's looking like the best car that's out there this year, and he has the first pit stall. He gets to choose his lane on the initial start, which will probably be on the inside. You're not going to see anybody really hugging the wall this week, and that's always been Kyle Larson's favorite move. But nonetheless, I think he'll be able to manage here just fine. He obviously likes this track a lot. The only problem that he'll have is the guy who's directly behind him, Martin Truex Jr. He's at $10,000. Forgot to mention Kyle Larson's practice times. He was fastest in first practice, but that's the one that really matters the least. He was still top 10 in the 2 practices today. And it's nice to be doing a podcast after practice for once, because they really are important. As we saw last week, the guys that are fast in practice were really fast out there at Pocono, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of that this week. They aren't really holding anything back there in the second and third practices. The first practice, they're in qualifying trim, so I don't really pay attention to that practice too much. But Martin Truex Jr. was fastest in second practice. And while third practice is usually more helpful than second practice because they're closer to race trim then, they've gotten all the kinks out of the car and all that. But second practice is actually done at a time when the temperatures would be more similar to what they will be during race time. And they were mentioning in the broadcast how sensitive these tires and these cars are to the heat changes as the day goes on. And people will either set up their cars to kind of change as a run goes on and get more comfortable and better, or they'll start their cars off in a really good spot to make sure they win off of the restart, but then it'll slowly get away from optimal as the run goes longer. You'll see a lot of that this week. I think Truex is probably going to, if I had to guess, I assume he wouldn't race Larson too hard for the lead. He'll probably, I mean, he's never really been one to kill it off of restarts, but Kyle Larson actually is one of the best restarters. In fact, according to the stats we have on the cheat sheet here, he has the best restart numbers of anyone this year, and that's not really much of a surprise. That's a big part of his game. But I definitely see Truex being able to hone his car in, kind of change as the night goes on, and I bet by the end of the night Truex has the best car, because that's what his entire game plan is. Pretty much every time he's out there, it's just sometimes his car isn't even optimal, and he still has the best car out there. I mean, this is an intermediate track, and this is Martin Truex Jr. You shouldn't have to think too hard into it, but pretty much everyone knows that Larson and Truex are both going to be popular. Have them both over 40% owned, and I think stacking them together will also be a popular option this week. If I had to guess which strategy is probably better, I'd honestly go with Truex over Larson. That's the way I'm leaning right now. I know Larson will lead the first chunk of laps, and that will come with fast laps, at least for the first chunk of it. But once pit stops start happening, then the fast laps are out the window. They go to whomever. There's no real way to know. But I think Truex will soak up a lot of fast laps because he always gets a lot of fast laps. And he'll be able to hone his car in. And if there's any sort of extended Stage 2 green flag run like there usually is, I think Truex leads all of those and not Larson. Unless a guy like Keselowski or Kyle Busch finds his way to the front by then to kind of get their nose into things. And that's a possibility too. So you don't even necessarily need to have Larson or Truex. I'd play a few lineups without either of them and maybe play a Kyle Busch or even a Joey Logano or Keselowski, as we'll get into later. But I think those guys have a chance at some domination here. Clint Boyer is going to be one of the most interesting plays of the week. He's starting third, but he's only $6,800. He dropped about $2,000 on DraftKings from last week to this week. I don't know what in the world happened there. I was excited to use him all over the place if he qualified like 20th, because that's just way too cheap. But he qualified third, so I think he represents a little better value now because he's just a complete fade. He's going to get a lot of ownership because people are going to see him, see how expensive he's been, and then look at his price and go, wow, third? He pretty much always stays in the top 10. And granted, yeah, he's good at staying in the top 10. It's just if anything happens to him, or even if he just gets shuffled back a little bit, like I think he will, because he still has guys like Kyle Busch behind him, and Logano, and Hamlin, and Blaney, and Kenseth, and Elliott, Harvick, Keselowski, Jimmy Johnson, all those guys. It's going to be hard to hold all of them off. But I do think he is in a good spot. His practice times are pretty much always top 10. Bottom part of the top 10. He's had bad luck in here recently. He's had some crashes, but before then, he was pretty much a top 10 machine at this track. So I'll probably use him minimally, or just fade him completely, like 5%, and just doing that, hoping that something will happen to him, because I think he's going to be a popular play this week. And starting third with no real domination upside, the best he can really do is just kind of stay in the top 5. And I don't really see that happening. So I think there are some really good drivers that will take better cars to the front part of this race. And the top 5 is pretty much going to be the same top 5 all race. So let's talk about one of those 5 here at $9,500. Very cheap for him. Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch has looked absolutely incredible over the last few weeks. He just cannot pull off the win. He made a really idiotic move, I think, last week, staying out on tires when he was in the lead and everybody else ended up getting tires, and he just got blown by pretty quickly. It was such a dumb move. He should have just gone in. He would have only lost like 1 or 2 spots that he would have been able to very quickly overcome. But things like that have just been happening to him this year. And Team JGR is still without a victory, which is just astonishing. But it's also astonishing how many first-time winners and things that we're getting this year. So it's an interesting year. But Kyle Busch at $9,500, he's going to be popular. That's a very cheap price for him. He has a lot of Dominator upside. He was second fastest in every single practice this week. So his car is super fast. you know he's going to he's going to make a case for himself by the end of the race. I think unless something happens to him, he's going to be right there. Will he lead a bunch of laps? I'm not sure. I mean, it's really hard to get around Larson and Truex, and he'll have Penske behind him, who's in a much better place than last week. And you also got guys like Kevin Harvick who are going to make themselves known by the end of the race. So it's hard to really even know who's going to dominate. There are many different ways that this could shake out. So Kyle Busch is kind of on the outside looking in there, and I think he's still going to be very popular with his cheap price. If you want to use him, go ahead and use him, but I'll try to be a little bit underweight on the field and hope that Larson or Truex can kind of just sit out there the whole race. I feel like Truex has the ability to do just that. So that'll be part of my game plan. But if you want to use a bunch of Kyle Busch and think he can dominate, I mean, he absolutely can. He has the car to. It just hasn't actually been happening recently. His teammate, Denny Hamlin, is at $8,600, starting 5th right behind him. It's a pretty cheap price for him, but that's pretty much about what he's been worth this year. Starting 5th, there's no real upside here. He's not going to dominate over the guys in front of him. I just don't see it happening, and he hasn't done it all year. He hasn't gotten fast laps or done anything, really. He had okay 10-lap practice times, but we didn't even get very many of them this week. In practice, he just stayed in the upper teens as far as speed goes, so it's just not a very interesting play. Ryan Blaney at 8,700, coming off his first career win. He's starting 6th, and he's sort of right there with Hamlin, right there in price and right there in situation. Like he's obviously a better play than Hamlin. He's starting one spot back and has been faster in practice. He's 4th fastest in second practice, but it's going to be really hard for him to dominate again. I mean, I know that he is really good at these intermediate tracks. It's just, the competition. There aren't a lot of guys in trouble this week, and there aren't really guys starting in the back. All of the studs pretty much qualified up near the top. So it's going to be hard to guess who's even going to do well here. I just don't see Blaney pulling it off again. I like him more at the shorter, the 1.5 mile intermediate tracks. But, I mean, he had a 4th place finish last year. Could it happen? Maybe, sure. It's just you have to make some choices because there's so many guys that you're going to want to play this week. And you got to kind of limit it down to who you think is the absolute best. And while Blaney has been very, very impressive this year, it was not a dominating victory at all. I mean, the optimal lineups didn't even have Blaney. So he just kind of snuck in there at the very end. And he gets into trouble. Fair share. I mean, just looking at the guys who qualified top 5, all of them have at least 10, if not 13 or 12 lead lap finishes this year. Blaney only has 7, so only half of the time he finishes on the lead lap. Trouble kind of follows him around a little. I'm just not too into that. Right behind Blaney, starting 7th, is Joey Logano at $9,200, which is an excellent price for him. 3rd fastest in first practice, 9th fastest in second practice, then 4th fastest in third practice. Kind of a tongue twister there, but he has been very, very good at Pocono. He has not finished outside of the top 10 since the repave. He's excellent here. He won this race last summer. I guess technically spring. We have a couple of days till summer. So last spring, he won this race in dominating fashion, leading 150 laps. All out, great performance. Granted, Penske has been in a world of trouble recently, but they looked a lot better last week, and I think this is a prime opportunity for a low-owned Joey Logano to be a very good play. I think his low price will probably entice a reasonable amount of people to play him, but there's no way he gets any sort of chalk. Because I think Kevin Harvick starting 11th and Keselowski starting 12th and even Chase Elliott starting 10th, who has a really good track record here. I think those plays will kind of suck ownership from Logano, and he's going to be 20% at max, and this is one of his best tracks. I think a very sneaky Logano is going to be an excellent play and could very well dominate this race. Jamie McMurray starting 8th at 8,200. Not a lot of interest there. He started kind of high. and he's not going to dominate, so not interested in that play right there. I like other guys in that range. Matt Kenseth at 8,900, he starts ninth. Again, not terribly interesting. He won back here in 2015, but he hasn't dominated anything this year outside of a race where he started on the pole at a track that he was a specialist at. And while he's won here before, he's not that incredible outside of that victory. And his car is just right there with Hamlin's, is like just very disappointing this year. So I don't really like Kenseth there. Elliott starting 10th should be a popular option because he's finished second both the times that he's raced here, and he's also led a good chunk of laps. And that was with the lower downforce package this last race he finished second at. So he was battling with Larson right there towards the end. It was one of those races that made you go, man, these young guys are really good, because Larson, Elliott, and Blaney finished in the top four. Pretty wild there. But Chase at 9,400, reasonable price for him. His practice times just weren't there. He was in the lower part of the teens. Hendricks is really struggling. Jimmy Johnson got into that crash and went to the back, and you know of Dale Jr.'s troubles. And it's just Elliott hasn't been dominating recently like he had been in the very beginning of the year. Something about their cars are kind of taking a step back. I know he's gotten into some trouble, just a little bit. A few races this year he hasn't finished. But I don't think that's the reason I won't play him. I just won't play him because I've got so many guys I need to play in this $9,000 range. I want to get on Logano and Harvick and Keselowski, so I need to get away from Chase. It's my favorite driver. I love you, Chase, but I'm going to go a different route this way. I'm not going to bite on the track history too much, although I think it is it's very enticing, but I think I'm going to go a different direction this week. I just need you to prove that you can dominate a little more, so maybe that'll be the case and I'll play you next week, or maybe I'll start 30th again, and that'd be wonderful. But moving on to Kevin Harvick, I think Harvick is going to be popular this week. 9,900, sure, it's a little bit expensive, third most expensive guy in the field, but not even $10,000. That's very affordable. He has 7 top 5 finishes in the last 8 races here. Most of them second place finishes. He had a span of 5 second place finishes in 6 races. It is crazy. But this is a track he's very good at. He almost won last race. He was right there pushing Blaney till the bitter end. Had a really fast car. He has a very fast car this week, even though he qualified 11th. He won the first 2 qualifying sessions before just putting up kind of a crappy performance. I think he got a little loose there at the end of his qualifying run. So starting 11th, that's some nice value because he's going to be pushing top 5 sooner than later in this race. I think he'll get around guys like Kenseth and McMurray pretty easily. And even if he doesn't dominate, him finishing like 3rd will be fine. And I think that's about where he's going to finish. I think I'll add another second place finish to the repertoire. That doesn't sound bad. So he doesn't even need to dominate, but he very much has a chance to dominate here. And once he's out in front, he kind of just chills there because he always sets his car up for the long run. So I think a good game plan would be like Truex and then Harvick, because I could see Truex leading the first half and then him giving up the lead to Harvick, and then of course, Cole Whitt passes him on the last lap to take the victory there. That's just my race vision. That's how I see it. But anyway, moving on to Brad Keselowski. Brad Keselowski is someone I like even more than Harvick, because Harvick's going to be popular. Keselowski, not so much. But now I'm thinking he might be a little more popular because he was just fastest in 3rd practice. So he's going to be... he's not going to be that sub 20% Keselowski that we've been getting for the last few weeks. He's probably going to be pushing almost 30%, but I think you need to pay that for him. Him starting 12th is really nice. He's going to be right there with Harvick and pushing for the top 5. I know it'll be congested, but he knows how to get his nose around traffic. That's definitely for sure. He already has a win on the season, unlike guys like Harvick, so he isn't going to be quite as conservative. He's going to be able to make these aggressive calls to try and steal a win or something. just because he can afford to. He already has won multiple times this year. So I like him. And the same thing could be said about Jimmy Johnson, who's won multiple times this year, but he is going to the back in a backup car. That kind of sucks, but an interesting stat that they brought up. Very cool stat. 4 of the last 5 Jimmy Johnson victories have come from him going to the rear. So Jimmy Johnson go to the rear of the field. It really doesn't matter at all. He'll start 13th technically, which is fine for him. He'll definitely finish ahead of that. 9,800, that's cheaper than what we've been getting Johnson for, but all of the guys are a little bit cheaper this week except for Larson. So $9,800, that's fine. I'm kind of worried about Hendricks having some problems in the last few weeks, but he was very good in practice, 3rd fastest in 2nd practice, and he's won here like he's won everywhere. He can pretty much win out of nowhere, so he might be that guy that just comes through the field in like 40 laps, and then out of nowhere he's leading after just staying out or pitting early or something like that. I could definitely see that happening with Jimmy Johnson, Chad Knaus. You know how it is. They're the ultra wizard magicians or whatever, and people will see that he's going to the rear, and they're going to jump off of him. They're going to get on to guys like Harvick and Keselowski, so I kind of like Johnson for that. Like his practice times, he actually seemed to get a little bit better with his backup car, and Hendricks always has awesome backup cars, so I like him. I also like Eric Jones starting 14th, $8,000. You saw what he did last week. He stayed out very late on his pits, and he ended up dominating a good chunk of the race. He led about 40 laps, with not only that chunk that he grabbed there from just staying out to the very end of his pit window. He also had come back later, sort of using the same strategy, got out in front on some older tires, and was actually able to stay out in front and fend guys off for a little while. He's teammates with Martin Truex Jr. I always call him Martin Truex Jr. And just like him, he's been very good at these intermediate tracks, very fast. He was 5th quickest in 3rd practice. He's got to be a really nice option, and I think he just kind of goes a bit overlooked. I don't think guys will look in the $8,000 range this week. I really don't think that'll happen. I think people will try to get like 4 $9,000 guys, a $10,000 guy, and just a couple of punts, because there are some punts that are going to be very popular down there. So we had a few guys go to the back. So Eric Jones at $8,000. He was only 5% owned last week. He helped me finish top 10 in the $4 GPP tournament last week. I kind of like him for that, and I'll definitely be playing him again this week at sub 20% ownership, I would hope. Starting 15th, which is like the lowest this guy's qualified all year. It's crazy how good he qualifies week to week, but Kurt Busch is finally outside of the top like 12. Starting 15th at a track that he's won at not too long ago. He won this race 2 years ago. Now, I don't think that he can win again because he really has not been dominating at all the last like 2 or 3 years. Even though he won the Daytona 500, that was only because dudes are crashing out in front of him. But he's always a very low-owned option, and that's something I want to attack a lot this week. He has looked very good in recent weeks. He's just kind of had trouble follow him a bit, but he was having those electrical issues earlier in the season. That has completely passed him. He's very nice to pair with Harvick because Stewart Haas might have a really nice day out here, especially if guys like Hendricks and JGR struggle. So I like the Kurt Busch play for the first time all year. I think this might have been. I think it's the second time I've advocated for Kurt Busch all year long. So that's a very rare occurrence right there. Casey Kane at 7,700, starting 16th. You'd prefer him back in the 20s or 30s like we've been seeing him, but he's going to go low owned. And he was okay in practice, like the high teens. So if you want to play him, sure, he's pretty much the same play as Dale Earnhardt Jr. here, just with a lot less risk. Junior starts right behind him in 17th, $7,800, so just $100 more. I think people are going to be off of Dale Earnhardt Jr. just massively after last week. He ruined the entire field as one of the highest owned guys. And he's ran into trouble how many times this year? Not as much as Blaney. He actually has 8 lead lap finishes to Blaney's 7. But, man, every week it's just something different. He blew his engine in practice, had to go to a backup, went to the back of the field, and then blew his engine again, trying to shift from second to third, ended up going from second to fourth. It was obviously machine error because there's no way it was him. I mean, you really have to try to be able to do something like that. And he's been shifting his entire life. He's a professional driver, for Christ's sake. So, don't know why people would think that it was just Dale Earnhardt Jr. slipping up or like his concussion issues or anything. I don't think it was like that. I think it was a design flaw that Hendricks brought in that last week. And Hendricks was really messed up last week. Like, all of them crashed except for Chase. So people are going to have that fresh in their mind. They're going to think, oh, Jimmy Johnson's going to the back this week. I already smell trouble for him. No one's really going to play Dale Earnhardt Jr. We'll finally see his ownership go to like the teens. If you want to play him, go for it. I mean, when he doesn't crash here, is a very good track record. The longer the track, the better Dale Earnhardt Jr. is at it. So if you want to go there, sure. It's just a very high-risk option. Right underneath Earnhardt Jr. here in 18th starting position, we start to get to some really interesting plays that I like a lot this week. This 20th place range, right around here. Looking at the positional summary that we have posted on the premium cheat sheet. I forgot to plug earlier, but remember, guys, if you want access to this cheat sheet, which contains a historical performance log of every performance at Michigan, which is pretty neat because you can like sort it by things like fast laps and lead laps or whatever and see how many people get on average and whatnot. But one of the more interesting things that we have on the cheat sheet is the starting position summary sheet, which shows how often people hit certain fantasy point marks starting in different starting positions and other things like lead laps, fast laps, and all that. Looking at that, if you want to get access to that, please sign up at dfsarmy.com. Use promo code TACO for a lifetime 20% off. But if you go ahead and look at that, I'll give you a little bit of the scoop on what's on there. We see a ton of scoring coming from the 1st through 5th starting position. It makes a ton of sense. Looking back over the last 4 years, 25% of pole sitters have scored over 100 fantasy points. So you see just an outlandish number of fantasy points going to the pole position driver, an average of 68 fantasy points if you start on the pole. But after that 1st through 5th starting position, it really drops off like majorly. Only 13% of people starting 6th through 10th have scored 40 fantasy points or more. But you do see a resurgence in fantasy points if you get down to the 21st through 25th range and the 16th through 20th range, better than the 10 starting spots ahead of it. So I kind of like this range just because historically this has been a very good place to get fantasy scoring from, especially with the field being smaller and place differential mattering a little less the farther we go down this field. So in this range, I love me some Austin Dillon and Ryan Newman. These are RCR teammates. Both Dillon and Newman have really good track histories here, and their ownership is just going to be very low, even though Dillon got that win recently. I think people forget about him starting 18th. It doesn't sound that cool, like, you'd like to see him in the 20s or 30s, but it doesn't really do that. But he's very good here, and so is Newman. And Newman is just so cheap at 7,200. Their practice times weren't that great, but they've got the equipment to do it, I think. I just really like the low ownership I'm projecting for them. Definitely in the lower teens, maybe a little bit more for Newman than Dillon. And I don't know, I just feel like Dillon could possibly crack a top 5. He's done that here before. And Newman is a little more safer. I'd play him in cash since I think he's pretty much going to lock up a 12th place finish or something like that. And starting 19th, that's going to give you just enough value to be on a winning GPP roster and definitely help lock you in for cash, especially at a low DNF rate track like this. And right behind the RCR guys is one of my favorite plays of the week. I've kind of been waiting all year to really play him, but he's finally in a perfect spot, is Daniel Suarez, starting 20th. It's about time we get him out of the top 10 in qualifying. Starting 20th, that's very enticing. He's very good here in the Xfinity Series. He's yet to race in the Cup Series, but he won this race in the Xfinity Series last year, and he was 6th fastest in third practice. So I like that a lot. I think he's going to be sneaky because people really have not liked rostering Suarez a lot this year. They never liked Carl Edwards either. So he's like the real mini version of Carl Edwards, just at a much cheaper price and a much lower starting position than he would always get. So Suarez, excellent play. I'm going to use him heavily this week. And I'm also going to be using the next guy in the starting lineup quite a bit. Starting 21st, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at only $7,100. He's very good at these intermediate tracks. Looking at his stats from intermediate tracks this year, his driver rating is just a touch under 80, which absolutely sticks out in his salary range. He's one of the best in that regard. Also very good with 36 average quality passes, which is very significant. And this sample is not even including his win on the season. He's just been very good at intermediate tracks. And his teammate, Trevor Bayne, is going to be even more popular starting down there in 27th, but there's a chance that he might not even race because his wife is expecting a baby. But I like Junior, not that Junior, Stenhouse Jr. I like him a lot. And underneath them, you've got Michael McDowell, starting 22nd. He was excellent last week, just excellent. I faded him because he started way too high in 11th, and he ended up staying right around there almost all race. It was an incredible sight to see. Ended up shuffling back a little bit as expected towards the end of the race, but it was just a very impressive outing by him. I just don't think that he can... He still can't even move up from like 22nd. I mean, I guess he could at this point, but equipment matters so much at Michigan, with the speeds being upwards of 210 miles an hour. I don't think McDowell has what it takes to win this week, or even being a winning roster. I see him falling back to about 25th or so. Danica Patrick does have the equipment, starting 23rd at $6,200 in DraftKings. She has a track history here that's kind of oddly consistent. Like, she always finishes right around like 20th place. And starting 23rd, I guess that'd be okay. I mean, she's kind of cheap, and she's not going to be owned at all. It's just, I don't see her moving up much farther than that. She'll probably just stay right where she's at. Like, I like her. I don't even like her for cash because there are much better options starting lower. I just don't really like her at all because I don't see much upside for her. Maybe stack her with like Boyer and Kurt Busch and Kevin Harvick and just make a stack that way, all teammates. But I'm not really feeling Patrick this week like I was last week. Just starting a little bit high. Same with Chris Buescher, starting 24th. He qualified a bit too high. AJ Allmendinger starting 25th, but he will be going to the rear as he wrecked the crap out of his car in practice, right on like the final lap too. It's a real shame there. Him going to the rear is kind of a killer for him. Maybe you could play him. I mean, starting 25th, that's not bad. He could work his way back up there. But this is absolutely not the track type that AJ Allmendinger's ever done well at. But he will be low owned if you want to go that route. Then up next we have Darrell Wallace Jr., or Bubba Wallace, as we call him. Real interesting stat about him. He was racing the 6 car in the Xfinity Series this year, and he had 6 finishes where he finished 6th place. So he might have the devil on his side there, maybe. Who knows? But he's $5,700, driving Eric Almirola's car, starting 26th. Not practicing that great until final practice where he was 21st fastest. He's just very cheap. His equipment's all right. It's just last race he looked like a super rookie. He almost went to the wrong number. He tried to go to Trevor Bayne's pit stop because he used to go into the number 6. just like some real basic learning curve stuff. Like he didn't know how to not speed on pit road, or he couldn't figure out the digital dash and matching that up to the timing lines, because he had never really done that until going into the Sprint Cup, or the Monster Energy Cup. My bad, sorry. So if you think that, he practiced these sort of things this week, which he probably did, and has his kind of, rookie shakes out of the way or something like that, and you just focus on his actual driving. He wasn't bad last week. He ended up fighting back a little bit after getting a few laps down with those stupid pit penalties and whatnot. If he doesn't make those mistakes this week and kind of steps up, he could definitely move up from 26th. It's a lot better than starting 16th like he did last week. So Bubba Wallace is a little interesting. It'll be a nice little pivot off of some of these plays that are going to be very popular in his range, notably Landon Castle. So going down to Trevor Bayne, who's only $6,400 this week. Very, very big price drop for him, as he was in the 7,000s for a while. At worst, the upper 6,000s, but 6,400 is very cheap for Trevor Bayne. He's starting 27th, and he's not been bad at this track at all. This might be one of his better tracks. A top 10 finish in this race 2 years ago. The only problem is he might not actually race this race. His wife is expecting a baby, and he's got Ryan Reed ready to take over his ride if his wife is going to deliver. You never know what'll happen. I mean, we'll probably you'll have to come in the Slack chat right before the race is starting. We will have you guys informed on the latest on the situation and whatnot, and if he's not playing, we'll ping everybody and let you guys know to not play him, get off of him. And that would be great, because if Ryan Reed comes in, he won't be scoring any fantasy points for Trevor Bayne. But if he does race, he's in a great spot. So it's like, I just wish he was starting like up high or something so I could just fade him easily. But he really is in a very nice spot, and he's a very cheap price. So if it's confirmed that he's racing, I would be all about him. And especially with the reduced ownership that he'll get, because he would be a totally popular play if it wasn't for this news hanging over him, which is going to get people off of him. So I'll let you guys know tomorrow. That play is still up in the air right now. Don't start Matt DiBenedetto starting 28th. That doesn't make any sense. David Reagan has been popular over the last few weeks. He was over 30% ownership, starting 31st, and now he's starting 29th, and I don't think he'll be popular at all. He hadn't been doing a ton. I guess he was okay last race, but starting 29th at a field that's reduced like this, he's got a lot of better drivers right behind him, and he's been bumped all the way up to $6,300. So no thank you. I will pay $200 more for the guy starting right behind him, Paul Menard, at $6,500. His track record here is amazing. He had fourth place finishes in a row from 2013 to 2014. Has not finished worse than 18th since the switch to the Generation 6 car in 2013 and the repave of this track last. So he's one of the better drivers out here. And you notice that Team RCR has awesome track record here in all of their drivers. Paul Menard being the best of all of them, and him being only $6,500. I mean, that's going to be insanely nice. So he's going to be a great play. He's always been very low owned, kind of under the radar sort of guy, and there's a play right in his price range that's going to be way more popular once you get towards the bottom of the field here. He'll be a nice little pivot off of him, but honestly, you should just play him alongside him, because we'll get to him in a little bit here. Real quick, we got to go through a bunch of these scrubs. Ryan Sieg starting 31st. He's a little bit faster than guys like Ware and Galding had been, but starting 32nd, no way. Corey LaJoy, starting 31st, because LaJoy is starting 32nd, but again, no way. Cole Witt starting 33rd. You could possibly play him. I mean, the guys behind him, two of them are going to jump right past him, but he could get past LaJoy and Sieg at least, and then anyone that crashes. But still not a play I'd be too heavily invested in unless I really needed to punt down to 4,900 here. Then Sorensen at 5,000. We saw Chastain drive the crap out of this car a few weeks ago. Sorensen can't really do that in this car. It's pretty bad. Starting 34th, nah. Jeffrey Earnhardt starting 35th, no, he'll finish like last of the entire field. Now we get into the interesting plays here. Two guys that couldn't make qualifying runs. Landon Castle at 5,200. Very, very cheap price for him. He's going to be popular and even has a decent track record here. The problem is that he's going to be in a backup car in one of the worst teams you can be in NASCAR, and that might be a problem. And that problem kind of presented itself on the last two practices with this car. He was dead last in second practice, and if you're behind Jeffrey Earnhardt, you got some problems. And then Jeffrey Earnhardt was the only car who was faster in happy hour practice. So I'd be very concerned with Castle. I don't really know if I want to use him because their backup cars are just not as good as the primary cars when it comes to these crappy teams. But starting way back in 36th, if a few guys crash and he works his way past a few guys, he could be a really nice filler play because he's only $5,200. I just wouldn't go all in on him with such a bad car at a track where equipment matters so much. Like, he'll finish laps down. Now, the more interesting play here, the most interesting play on the slate, and someone you could go 100% all in on, Ty Dillon, only $6,100, so pretty cheap for him. He had been looking a lot better. He'd put up some quality finishes recently. He did not get to take a qualifying lap, and he will be starting 37th at the tail end of this field. He's practicing 26th fastest in every practice this week. So even if you lock him in at 26th place, and I think he'll do better than that, that's going to put you at almost 40 fantasy points if he gets any sort of like fast laps or steals more lead laps like he had in the last few races. Dillon is obviously a very, very good play this week, and you can go all in on him if you want. And there's not really much upside in fading him either, because if he finishes last, there are only 37 cars on the track, so he won't even be putting up like 3 or 4 points like it would at a full field. He'd be getting like 6 or 7. I mean, that's the worst he can do. That's his floor. He can't go negative. He can't even get less than like 5. So play Dillon. Play him 100% if you want. I'm still on the fence about playing him 100%. I might play him like 90% or something, just in case. But assuming nothing goes wrong, and this is a low DNF track, Dillon will be fine, and he'll be flying into the 20s at least. And maybe with him being in the back, he'll even try some pit strategy stuff, and that worked out for him fantastically in his last few races. So Ty Dillon, pretty much all in on. Shove your chips that way. The worst he could do is get you like 5 or 6 points, and that's not even the worst for such a cheap guy, just filling out your roster. So that'll do it for Taco's Fast 40. Had to just be myself today. Brady was busy out on the road driving around, so I wish him the best, and I wish you guys the best this week. Come hit up the Slack chat right before the race. We'll let you know all the latest news. And I'll see you on Father's Day. Hope you fathers out there spend some good time with your kids. I know I will be. Get to watch some U.S. Open golf, watch some NASCAR, drink a few beers, play with the kids. It's going to be a great day. So I will see you next week at, I think it's Sonoma next week. You can make fun of me if that's not it, but I think we're going to Sonoma next week. So I'll see you guys then. Later.
Thank you for listening to the DFS Army podcast. Join the DFS Army today and gain access to our private Slack chat, where you can chat with real DFS pros and coaches, as well as other DFS Army members with winning track records. Also included in your membership is access to our premium articles, DFS Army weighted projections for every sport we offer, from NFL to MMA, weekly player picks and cheat sheets, the strategy vault of timeless concepts, and the DFS Army Domination Station, a truly state-of-the-art lineup optimizer, offering your personal projections or ours. The DFS Army membership is the best value across the industry. Join today and get 2 free ebooks, as well as the secrets to unlocking a new level to your game.